Well, the obituary writers are waxing eloquent, especially those on the alleged political left, about the death of the very old, and I mean really old, stand-up comic Mort Sahl. He was also claimed to be a satirist, and he'd poke fun at politicians especially, or what he deemed was hypocrisy in American life. And yes, he was a skeptic, which endeared him to some, especially the male left, but also he wasn't right on a lot of stuff. But he was 94, and apparently he had no surviving family members. He had a son from his, I think it was his second marriage, and he had died in a car accident back in 96, I think it was. So that was kind of sad. So he had nobody. I mean, he had a lot of people, you know, I guess, that cared about him, and I have to give him credit that he was able to continue his work in comedy up till almost the time he died. I mean, it's awful ageist to say it, but he could, instead of stand-up comedy, he did stooped-over comedy. But anyway, I don't even think he'd appreciate that. But anyhow, it was confirmed that he had died yesterday in Mill Valley. The New York Times waxes long on this, and I'll link it. And he had a lot of popularity, especially in the 60s, and evidently he had written, helped write some one-liners for JFK. And then when JFK died, of course, Mort Sahl was a big critic of the Warren Commission. Of course, that was all bullshit anyway. But back then, you know, it was really fashionable to be a conspiracy theorist, but of course it was bullshit. There was no conspiracy. But the reason I kind of focused on this guy is that he was an inveterate sexist. He was horrible. And no wonder the male left loved him so much. No wonder they did. Even though he was all over the place politically. You know, I think he voted both ways. Not at the same time. But he just... I don't get it. And see, I remember how he was way back 50 years ago. And they would ask his opinion about the women's movement and stuff. And even further back than that. And this book excerpt that they had on Google Books, there's some, I don't know what it's called. But anyway, liberal satire. Anyway, it says here, Sahl's material, noticeably backward, in fact, was Sahl's material on American women. Like Jules Pfeiffer, Sahl had always devoted much of his attention to the relationship of men and women and how they're competing for domination. See, he fancied himself as an intellectual. He really thought he was smarter. But you know, half of being intelligent is knowing what you're stupid at. And he was basically stupid. When it came to women, he didn't know shit. Underwriting, back to the quote, underwriting Sahl's attention on relationships between men and women, however, there was a strong and often ugly streak of misogyny. Oh, he was unabashed. He was totally unabashed sexist. In recordings from the early 60s, Sahl mocked a woman's concern over the issue of birth control and belittled competitive, aggressive, domineering career chicks. Modern women don't want to be girls, Sahl quipped, but they don't have the courage to be men. I'm not worried about Negroes, Sahl liked to quip. I'm worried about women. They've been liberated without a map. Joining Norman Mailer and other male intellectuals, which, you know, when you think about it, that's a non sequitur. Or, not a non sequitur, but, well, yeah, but it's also an oxymoron, with the accent on the moron. Sahl delivered his screed against the modern woman, describing her as cold and predatory. Yet Sahl's ruminations even proved too much for Playboy's readers, some of whom wrote to complain in Playboy's September 1962 issue. And of course, more and more people complained about him as time went on, because he just thought he was he thought he was hot shit. And I saw this, there's this thing on here. I don't know how long ago it was written, but they talked about Mort's appearance on the Dick Cavett show, and he got his ass handed to him by, who was it? John Simon. And Cavett then, and it says here, yeah, John Simon was pretty, could be vicious. And here was his attitude, Sahl. Cavett gave some examples of intellectual women. Now, this was around 1970, okay, right at the height or the beginning of the second wave feminist movement. Here, Sahl, we'll back up. Sahl said, the only real political philosopher, that was Steve Allen, we have in modern comedy. Well, I mean, Steve Allen, I think, was basically a good guy, but sometimes he was a little too full of himself. And definitely when it came to Mort, Sahl came out swinging against women with his vicious rant. That whole women's liberation thing is really incredible when they equate words like sexism with racism. I've never met a woman who's an intellectual. I've met a woman who want to come on with me. She'll come on with me using the currency of the moment. If that currency is Confederate script instead of real money, if it's politics, she'll talk about politics. Cavett gave some examples of intellectual women. Can you believe anybody having to say that? I mean, we look at it 50 years hence, right? And then Cavett said, some years back you said a woman's place is in the stove. He asked Sahl if there were any intellectual women, to which his guest responded, there are no intellectual women. They get a couple of stickers on their Volkswagen, a couple of daisies, and they're intellectuals. They're not really interested in what's going on. And then this writer of this article says, one can only speculate what experiences, rejections the Canadian-born satirist had with women to provoke such bitterness. And anyway, Cavett introduced prominent and feared theater and movie critic John Simon, who he called Bad John for reasons that are soon revealed. The host asked the critic if he was in search of an intellectual woman, and Simon replied that he'd known many. Sahl asked if any of them were actresses, and from that point on he was talking to Bad John. Perhaps not, said John. No, but probably as many intellectual women as intellectual ex-nightclub comedians. That's what Sahl needed. He needed to be put in his place. And so I thought I'd share that. And then he said here, they go on, it says, Sahl looks like a jellyfish that dropped into his lap. Bad manners don't work anywhere, even on television, was all he could muster. Simon replied, I think condemning an entire sex to the darkness of unintellectualism isn't exactly the best of manners. And the article goes on. But yeah, he got his ass handed to him. But of course it was a man. Too bad a woman couldn't hand him his ass. I think a Germaine Greer could have made mincemeat out of this piece of crap. So, old Mort, by that time he was already kind of over the hill. But, you know, he went on and he continued his career, but he never had the popularity he had in the 60s. So, anyway, I'll put this New York Times obit on here. Yeah, he was born in Montreal, Canada, and he went to Los Angeles when he was 7 years old. So he's based in California primarily. And he was on the Ed Sullivan Show a lot, as I remember. But yeah, you know, I mean, I don't dance on anybody's grave, but come on, you know, an intellect that hates women and isn't afraid to say it. You know, they should... I mean, yeah, he was a figure of some importance, but let's not gloss over the ugly side of this man, which was there when he was alive. And, you know, I don't want to say the good die young. That's not really true. But it's just, you know, it should be, you know, anything that's written about this guy should always point out, not gloss over, but point out about how vile he really was. And I mean, I was in my teens, and I'd hear this filth that came out of his mouth about women, and I didn't think he was funny, and I never thought he was funny. So anyway, that's all I have to say about old Mort. And like I said, it's too bad he died, but he had a long life, probably longer. I don't want to say longer than he should have, but you know, I don't mourn him. So that's it.